Hey everybody, this is just a quick review on writing after grading all of the CRA number 1 assignments. Um, as always happens, I come across some very common things that folks are not aware of or that maybe should be aware of. And I want to just go over the fundamentals of writing a good college level paper. And this is kind of like symbolic interactions, right? You're creating your own world. You're creating your own documents by which you are placing your thoughts into real space in order to communicate. And I want you to be good communicators. I want you to be able to demonstrate your analytical, critical thinking abilities in a way that is going to clearly bring across your intended thought without emotion, poor grammar, poor documentation skills getting in the way. I want you to be clear so that you can look your best. So this says what this lecture is all about. Just a real quick one. Anne Lamott wrote, "You can safely assume that you've created God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the same people you do." That's basically from a person who doesn't like opinionated people. And I don't agree with a lot of Anne Lamott, but I agree with her here that when we become so emotionally involved in our topic that we claim divine knowledge or secret knowledge or can read somebody's mind or know their heart or know their intent, it's dangerous. And so to take that step back, ask good questions, peel away the onion layers, bring good data to the table, then you don't have to worry about making any comments that are unsubstantiated. Now, this goes back to 2006, but I'm telling you, all the principles remain the same. Preparing a research paper is an essential skill, right? And different sources are always consulted, books, journals, magazines, da, 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 da. You need to know how to document and what sources are to be documented. And we need to just do not plagiarize. Just don't do it. Necessary tools are your sources, punctuation marks, and signal phrases. Absolutely. Make sure you know when to use punctuation marks, when to use those double or single quote marks for speeches or writings, titles, words in a special sense, like when we say race, right? Quote marks problematize it and say, well, this isn't really a thing. That's why we use quote marks around it. Direct quotations, though, this is because somebody said something. Make sure that when you're using a quote, it's actually something somebody wrote or said, and you document that this somebody wrote or said it, that it wasn't your words. Now, you can quote yourself and document yourself, but make sure you are consistent and accurate in all that documentation. So, for example, we've got this basic quote. "My first graders freak out when they see red." End quote. State the name of the author, right? Author of the quote, and then open quote again to finish the thought. And here is where it occurs in the article by Culbreth on page 145. Then also a quote within a quote. Look at the single quote marks. And note that we don't cite Bill Murray, but we're citing a different work. And in here, in this document, it's all ASA style. Signal phrases anchor the quotes. So Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger in California, that's anchoring the quote to a specific location. Make sure you understand where you're at, when you're at, what you're at, who you're at, all of the above, so it's clear. So these are some common verbs used in signal phrases. Feel free to get out that thesaurus. Don't use the same word over and over again. Use a number of different types of signal phrases, adjectives, adverbs, nouns if you can. Make it interesting for your reader. Documentation actually helps you avoid plagiarism. The more you document, the more you show your reader that you have done your own research. Be careful, because plagiarism can be accidental. Maybe you read something somewhere and you're remembering it, but you don't remember it, and you put it in there otherwise, and you don't have a source. And it's because you can't remember it, and you meant to go back and look for it, but you didn't. But you've plagiarized. Because by not citing a source, you made it look as though that thought is your own, and it's not your own. And you need to document the actual author so that you don't take credit for something you didn't do. Make sure you know the type of source, whether it's a quote or a paraphrase itself, and then paraphrase and summarize quotes. That's perfectly legit. Make sure you know how to cite things on the web and what a source citation is, rather than a secondary citation, secondary source, primary source, secondary source. Make sure you know the difference and how to cite them. You must always acknowledge the source, no matter how you use it, no matter how much you use it, no matter how often you use it. You have to acknowledge the source of any quote, stat, statement of fact, paraphrase, scene, title, whatever it is. If you didn't write it, somebody else did, you need to acknowledge it. So yes, Tombs forms of citation, quotations, using the source's exact words, or a paraphrase, using your own words. And this is the definition of a paraphrase. Know it, love it, use it. Direct quotation, using quotation marks for the whole sentence, using capital letters for the first word. Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger said that. Capital letter, start of the sentence, the complete quote. Or a part of a sentence. Don't use a capital letter. Just use a small letter. It starts in the middle. I like to put ... if it shows in the middle of the sentence. You don't have to. That's more of a stylistic thing. Indirect quotation, you don't use quotation marks at all, because an indirect quotation is like a paraphrase. And so you would not use quotation marks. Paraphrases are approximately the same or slightly fewer number of words as the source, follow the same organization as the source, and the same level of detail. A paraphrase demonstrates to your reader, i.e. me, that you have actually read, understand, comprehend, and can apply everything you read. That's why a paraphrase is often better than a quote. Because often people will say, and use as filler, oftentimes, or they don't quite understand it. So they'll say, well, as Smith said, we can apply this concept, quote, therefore that's what I'm doing. But you didn't tell me you understand it. All you said is, Smith says we can apply this way. I want to know you think it's legitimate to apply this theory in this way. So paraphrasing is much better. And that's why on some of your papers, I wrote back and said, please throw out this quote, or this quote's too long, or this quote's inappropriate, or this quote doesn't even fit, and paraphrase it. Your objective is to not include your own interpretation, but to paraphrase the author's interpretation. So to write a paraphrase, read the source, take notes, prepare a draft, compare your draft to the original, make sure all ideas are explored and follow the same order as the source. Very important. So here's an example of the paraphrase. Here's the original from Lemonic, 2006, 210 words. Next, 145 words. You'll notice that the order, the points are all there in the summary, even though 25% fewer words have been used. Yes, journal Science, which is in italics, conducted during the past 26 years. Okay, let's see. Journal Science, over the past 26 years. Oh, why did that person use italics then if the original didn't? Well, because the person writing and using the paraphrase thought this was something important for the reader to notice. So it's known that the italics are yours. And you can say in parentheses or in a footnote, italics mine, or italics in original. Something like that is always a good idea to do. Make sure the logic and the argument, though, are the same. So your use of a quotation depends on how important the exact words are. So if a quote gives strength to your paper, then go ahead and use it. But if it doesn't help your paper, don't use it. Paraphrase. If it's a net zero, just paraphrase. Don't use a quote. Is your source primary or secondary? More quotes are acceptable from primary sources. Secondary sources, meaning somebody the author is quoting as a secondary source, or meaning an example you're bringing in from somewhere else. So your primary text you're analyzing is Smith, but Brown has a great example. So the example is a secondary source you're bringing in. You're going to be more likely to paraphrase that, hopefully you will, than Smith, where you're more likely to quote Smith since that's your primary source. Also note length. Long papers are suitable for more quotes. Shorter papers should use fewer quotes. These CRAs, 1 quote is great. 2 quotes max. If you get 3, you're really pushing it on a 2 to 3 page paper. They don't call for that many quotes. In-text citations, very, 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 very important. Note that in this paragraph, which actually is from a paper I wrote, so you know this is what I would do, in case you're looking for an example. Footnote on a word that might need a definition. So secularization, I give the definition of secularization down here. This is a paraphrase from the sociological writings of Marx and Weber, and then I give the source of the paraphrase. Note there's no page number here because there is no quote. However, when I quote, and note I'm starting in the middle of a sentence, and so there I do not have a capital letter, I give the author, the year, and the page number. Then I can go to my bibliography and look up the author and the year and the entire bibliographic entry for this quote. The same thing is true over here. However, here there's not a page number because this is a category where I've quoted the category rather than quoting the author. Up here is a quote of the author. Here is a quote of a category used in a poll. And so I need to qualify the categories, but it's not a quote, so I don't have a page number. Hopefully that's clear. Here's another example from the same paper of a documentation in-text citation for Stark. Note I don't have to put Stark because I already listed Marx, Weber, and Stark. Note that the page number now is here after I quote from this document. I then put the page number here without having to repeat Marx, Weber, and Stark, 1996. And then I have a final quote at the end of the paragraph here, and I use the page number there. Note that I also, in the footnote number 3, I have a quote, and the page number for those quotes. When you're done with your paper, or you think you're done with your paper, check your margins. Check your font. I got a few that were like in 8-point font. Hard to read. Please make sure it's 12-point. Just use standard everything in these papers. Don't make them fit anything. Just use standard Arial, Calibri, 12-point, Times New Roman, whatever your favorite one is, make it 11 or 12 points because that's standard. Make sure your margins are 1 inch. That's standard. Make sure your quotes are anchored by a signal phrase. Standard. Citations. Every entry in the list of references has at least one corresponding citation in the text. If you give me a bibliography of 3 items, and I only see 2 in-text citations, that's a problem. There should be at least one in-text citation for every document on the list of references. Should be probably more because you are doing more paraphrasing and quoting in a 2 to 3 page paper, absolutely. Check the author's name, check your references or in alphabetical order, proofread. Best way to proofread, my opinion, is to read it out loud to yourself. Then ask somebody else to proofread by reading it out loud. Make sure it sounds like you think it reads. If it doesn't, change it. Conclusion, documented sources is vital in order to avoid plagiarism, which is again against VCCS, PVCC policy. It can be criminally prosecuted in some cases. It definitely can be terms for getting an F for the paper, F for the class, or being expelled from the school. Please consider it serious. Task of writing a paper is simplified when the student is knowledgeable in the selection of sources, the uses of quotes and paraphrases, quotation marks, and signal phrases. And here's my references. I will put this up on Blackboard so that you have access to it as well. Thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to reading the next set of CRAs.